Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday in the Word. Last week, we read Nehemiah Chapter 9, and if you'll remember, in Nehemiah Chapter 9, it's basically a summary of some of the major events surrounding the relationship that God had first with Abraham and then with the Israelite people. And the Israelites are sort of recounting, the fact how good and gracious and merciful and faithful and trustworthy and wise and delivering and protecting and patient and compassionate God had been to them. And then how the Israelite people, consistently, would turn away from God, would complain about God, would want to do something different, would break God's commandments, and then God would forgive them. They would come back into fellowship, and it was sort of this ongoing cycle. And then chapter 9 wraps up with them saying, because of all this, because you have been so great and wonderful and merciful and gracious and compassionate and forgiving and taking care of us, and we've seen how our ancestors responded and how they often didn't obey and respect you and love you. We are going to make an oath, and that's how verse 9 wraps up. And then, so in chapter 10, it goes into the actual oath that they're making. And verses 1 through 27 list specific people who made this oath. And it's great to read those, but because I want to go through several chapters today, we're going to skip over all of those names. But God lists multiple people by name that made this oath. And then when you get to verse 28, it picks up and says, and the rest of the people, the priests, the Levites, the porters, the singers, the servants, and all those who had separated themselves from the people of the lands to return to the law of the Lord, both they and their wives, their sons and their daughters, and everyone having knowledge and understanding, strengthened their brethren, their neighbors, taking oaths and making a covenant to walk in the Lord's law, which he gave by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord our God, and his judgments and his statutes. So this is really important. It says that all of these people, having knowledge, having understanding, now that they could remember in past chapters, they were reading from the book of the law, and the priests were making sure that the people understood the words that they were hearing, understood what God was saying. So they all have this knowledge and understanding now, and they strengthen one another, and they're all taking this oath to walk in the Lord's law and do all of God's commandments and his judgments and his statutes. And then the rest of this chapter kind of goes into detail as to some of the specific things that they are committing as a people to do. It says in verse 30, and that we would not give our daughters to the people of the land, nor take their daughters for our sons. And if the people of the land should bring wares or provisions on the Sabbath day to sell, we would not buy of it. And whosoever should engage his animal in service on the Sabbath day, he would not receive hire, nor should he carry a burden on the Sabbath day, because it is holy. And in the 7th year, we would forgo all debts due to us. So they're not going to marry outside of their people. And if anyone's selling or buying or trying to hire out their animals on the Sabbath day, they're not going to engage with those people. And every 7 years, there was a year where all debts were forgiven. So if I owed you $100 and I still owed it to you on that 7th year, it would be forgiven, and I would not have to pay it. Verse 32, we also confirmed upon ourselves the ordinances to give the 3rd part of a shekel on the Sabbath for the work of the house of our God, for the showbread and for the continual meal offering, and for the continual burnt offering of the Sabbaths, the new moons, the feasts, and the holy things, and for the sin offerings to make an atonement for Israel, and for all the work of the house of our God. So they're also committing to give of what they have, to give money to help support the different feasts and festivals and the different things that they need in the house of the Lord. And they cast lots among the priests, the Levites, and the people for the wood offering to bring it into the house of the Lord our God, as it is written in the book of the law, and to bring the first fruits of our ground and the first fruits of all the fruit of the trees year by year to the house of the Lord. Also the firstborn of our sons and of our cattle, as it is written in the law of the Lord, and the firstlings of our herds and of our flocks, to bring to the house of our God, to the priests who minister in the house of our God. And to give the first fruits of our dough, our threshing floor, and the fruit of all manner of trees of wine and of oil, to the priests who minister before our God, and the tithes of our ground to the Levites, and the same Levites might take the tithes from all the country towns. And the priest, the son of Aaron, shall be included with the Levites in the distribution of their tithes, and the Levites shall bring up the tithe of the tithes to the house of our God, to the storehouses, into the treasure house. For the children of Israel and the descendants of Levi shall bring the offerings of the grain, of the wine, and the oil of the storehouses, where the vessels of the sanctuary, and the priests, the Levites, the porters, and the guards shall not forsake the house of our God. So this is just a few of the things that they are planning on doing, and they're committing to do in this oath to obey God's law. And one of the things in here in God's law is that God, it's just really neat how God always takes care of his people. And he has provision in here for the Levites and the priests because they were supposed to commit 100% of their time and energy to serving God. Whatever those duties may be in the temple or whatever those things were. They were not to work part-time in the temple and then also have to go have another job where maybe they're a farmer or they're a merchant or, they raise cattle or whatever that thing is. They were to commit 100% of their time to serving God, but they also needed their basic physical needs to be met. And so God took care of that in the law of Moses and made sure that, and we're going to see this come up again at the end of Nehemiah, so it's important to talk about it now, is that part of what the people were giving was to be used to take care of the physical needs of the priests and the Levites and those who spent 100% of their time employed in the service in the temple in serving God. So that is part of what they are committing to do, these people, when they make this oath. And then chapter 11 opens up and says, "Let the elders of the people dwell in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people shall cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to dwell in Jerusalem, the holy city, and the remaining 9/10 to dwell in towns." And the people blessed all the men who willingly offered themselves to dwell in Jerusalem. So the wall has been built, guys, and they've read through the book of the law. They've made sure everyone's understood it. They have gone through the history of the relationship that the Israelites have had with God. And now have made this oath that they are going to follow God's law and be obedient to it. They're not going to do what their ancestors did and turn away and do their own thing and worship false gods and all of that. And now they're organizing themselves because now that the city is rebuilt, they're trying to organize where people are going to live, how things are going to work. And so chapter 11 opens up with them talking about who's going to live actually inside the city of Jerusalem and who's going to live in towns outside of the city of Jerusalem. So they're organizing all this. And then the rest of this chapter, which we're not going to read in full today, is really breaking down, what priests were assigned. Sometimes it tells us what specifically jobs they were assigned to do. And it mostly talks about the priests. At the very end, it also lists some people who were in charge of overseeing towns and things as commanded by the king. Because remember, we're still dealing with being under an empire's rule. Jerusalem is not free on its own. So chapter 11 goes through all that, where they're organizing. How are we going to structure ourselves? How is all of this going to work? Now that the wall has been rebuilt, the temple has been rebuilt, the city is been fixed back up, people's homes and all of those things. And now what is going to happen? And then we get to chapter 12. And chapter 12 also gives us a long list of the priests and the Levites. In chapter 12, verse 1, it says, "Now these are the priests and the Levites who came up with Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, Seraiah, Ezra," and then it goes through again through verse 21 and 22, listing all of these folks. In verse 22, it says, "The Levites in the day of Eliashib, Jehoiada, Jehonan, and Jaddua were recorded chiefs of the fathers, also the priests, to the reign of Darius the Persian." So they are still under the Persian Empire at this point. But then this is where this gets really interesting. And then it says in verse 23, "The descendants of Levi, the chiefs of the fathers, were written in the book of Chronicles, even until the days of Johanan, the son of Eliashib, and the chiefs of the Levites were Hashbeel, Sherebiah, Joshua, the son of Kadmiel, with their brethren opposite them, to praise and give thanks, according to the commandments of David, the prophet of the Lord, watch opposite watch. Mattaniah, Bakkai, Obadiah, Shallum, Atlam, and Akab were porters keeping the watch at the gate." So they're listing people and talking about people who, with their brethren, are in charge of giving praise and thanks. Continually, it says watch opposite watch. So there were different watches throughout the night, right? And so one watch after another. And then it says in verse 26, "These were the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Joshua, the son of Jozadak, and in the days of Nehemiah the governor, and of Ezra the priest and scribe." Remember, Nehemiah, not only he came and helped rebuild Jerusalem, but then he was appointed governor for a period of time over this area. "And the wall of Jerusalem was finished, and they gathered the Levites together in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness and rejoicing, with thanksgiving and with singing, with cymbals and harps." So now they're going to have a huge celebration, dedicating the wall and rejoicing with thanksgiving. So we're going to read more of this, but I want to remind you, and we talked about this a few weeks ago when we were reading about Jesus Christ's life, and he gave that example. He was given the parable of the gentleman who had prepared a great feast, and then he calls people and invites them to come, and then people are making excuses. And so, like, one of the excuses was, I bought a plot of land and I have to go see it. And another of the excuses was that they had just bought oxen or some other animal, and that they had to go prove it, was the word that they used. And Bishop Halai talked about how when you purchased a plot of land or when you purchased an animal in the East, it could not be used until you had taken time to basically have a ceremony and dedicate it to God. And, this plot of land is going to be used to serve God to the best of my ability. And this is really what's happening here. They finished building up Jerusalem. The gates are fixed. The wall is fixed. People's homes are fixed. The temple's fixed. They've read the book of the law. They understand what they're supposed to do before God. They've organized themselves. Who's going to live where and how are things going to work. And now they are taking time to dedicate this work that they've done to God. And it says in verse 28, "And the sons of the singers gathered themselves together from the plain country round about Jerusalem, and from the villages of Netophah, also from Beth Gilgal, and out of the valley of Gibeah and Armath, for the singers had built for themselves villages round about Jerusalem. And the priests and the Levites purified themselves and purified the people and the gates and the wall. Then I brought up the chieftains of Judah upon the wall and appointed 2 great companies, and they walked upon the wall toward the right of the gate. And with them went Hoshea and the half of the chieftains of Judah, and Azrael, Ezra, and Meshullam, Judah and Benjamin, and Shemaiah and Jeremiah, and certain of the priest's sons with trumpets, namely Zechariah, the son of Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, the son of Mattaniah, the son of Malchah, the son of Zachar, the son of Asaph, and his brethren, Shemaiah, Azrael, Melal, Gelal, Ater, Nathaniel, Hanani, and Judah with the musical instruments of David the prophet and the servant of the Lord, and Ezra the scribe, went before them above the fountain gate. And opposite them they went up by the stairs of the city of David, at the ascent of the wall above the house of David, to the great gate eastward. And they gave thanks, and went up upon the wall, and I after them, and the half of the people went up upon the wall, and they stood upon the great tower, and upon the high wall, and upon the broad wall. So they're all standing around the wall. Remember we talked about how one of the sections of the wall that's still standing is like 20 feet thick. So it's plenty of room for people to stand and not be nervous about falling off. But they're all around the wall, and they're they got music going, and they're giving thanks. And from above the gate of Ephraim, as far as the old gate to the fish gate, and from the tower of Hananiel, as far as the great tower, even to the sheep gate, and they stood still in the great gate. Then the two companies that gave thanks entered the house of the Lord, and I and the half of the chieftains who were with me, and the priests, Eliakim, Maaseiah, Malhan, Machiah, Elio, Anani, Zechariah, and Hananiah, and those with trumpets, Mesa, Shemaiah, Eleazar, Uzzi, Johanan, Malchijah, Elam, Ezer, and Shammua, the singers, and Zariah, the leader. Also that day they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced, for the Lord had made them rejoice with great joy. The wives also and the children rejoiced, so that the joy of Jerusalem was heard even afar off. And on that day certain men were appointed over the chambers of the king's storehouse, to gather into them the offerings, the first fruits, and the tithes of the town, as it is written in the book of the law, for the priests and the Levites, since the Jews were rejoicing because the priests and the Levites had stood up keeping watch in the house of their God. And those who had charge of the ceremonial of purification, and the singers and the porters, served according to the commandment of David and of Solomon his son. For Asaph was in charge in the day of David, and he stood up at the head of the singers and sang praises and gave thanks before the Lord God. And all Israel in the days of Zerubbabel and in the days of Nehemiah gave gifts to the singers and to the porters, every day his portion, and they set aside holy things to the Levites, and the Levites set them aside for the descendants of Aaron. So again, this section is a blessing because it reminds us of several things. One is that, they read the book of the law and they understood that they were not being obedient to God and in fellowship with God like they should be. And when they understood better, now they've made a commitment to do better. And then they are doing their best to get themselves organized. And now they're taking time to thank God. They're not sitting back after it's all over and God's clearly blessed them and protected them and given increase to their labors. They haven't sat back and said, oh, what an awesome job we did, and pat themselves on the back. They're having this large dedication and celebration and time of praise and thanksgiving to thank God for all that he had done. And at the end, it's reminding us when it's talking about giving gifts and stuff that there were people that as part of the law, provision was made for because their full-time job was in the service of the Lord. And so it was the people were to give joyfully to those people so that their basic needs of, food and that kind of thing were met for them. So just really cool reminders here about, when you know better, you do better, and always giving thanks and praise to God because every good thing comes from him. Now, if this was a movie or if this was a fairy tale, then this would end with, and they all lived happily ever after. But it is not a fairy tale, and it is not a movie. It is something that really happened with real people who were imperfect people just like us, and people who lived in a broken world, controlled by the adversary, and influenced by the adversary. So they have everything set up at this point with apparent hearts to do the right thing. And we'll see how that, what happens next when we finish up the book of Nehemiah next week. So I'll close in prayer. God, thank you for this time together this morning. Thank you for being such a great, big, wonderful God and being so compassionate and loving and always taking care of us in every situation. We're so thankful that we can turn to you and you are always there for us. And you already have an answer of deliverance when we come to you about challenges that we're facing. So thankful that we can talk to you and praise you and just show our love to you. I'm thankful for this example in the Bible and also for the reminder that these folks were your servants. And look at all the wonderful things that you did for your servants. And now today we are your sons and your daughters, and we know that you would not do any less for us than you would have done for your servants that lived in Old Testament times. So what a great reminder and encouragement this morning as we start our day. So we just ask you to bless our day, Father. Please give us boldness to speak your word and have the right word at the right time when there's opportunities to share with others, so that your word can move out throughout the world and everyone that has ears to hear will have an opportunity to hear the greatness of what you and your son, Jesus Christ, accomplished for us. So we love you and praise you, and thank you so much for being with us in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Have a great day. Love you, Jen.